How do you properly value catchers in fantasy baseball? And is the market discount on utility-only players real? 2020 FSWA Baseball Writer of the Year, Ryan Bloomfield, joins us next on Beat the Shift. Welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruven Guy. How are you, Ruven?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great today. Getting excited for the season. Our final touches before our first drafts. My first draft is going to be March 4th with the mixed labor auction with you helping on the side there.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I think we're doing it together. Yeah, that's going to be the first draft. Position players actually started reporting this week, and it's very interesting to see the pictures of then and now, last year and this year, to see how they've improved or did not improve.
Yeah. So, and to help us today on our catchers and utility-only players, we have a very special guest. He is the recipient of the 2020 FSWA Baseball Writer of the Year Award from BaseballHQ. Welcome to the show, Ryan Bloomfield. How are you, Ryan?
I'm doing great, Ariel. Thanks for having me on, and Ruben, good to talk to you guys again. It's things are getting extremely busy, which is good. It's a great time of year, so excited to talk to you all tonight, and yeah, thanks again for having me on as a repeat guest. That's always good. I didn't mess up too bad the first time, so.
Yeah, our pleasure, and of course, we invited you on the show before you won the award, and we're happy that you did. And I guess it makes you all the more credible. But I mean, you've been having fantastic analysis for years, and so glad that you won the award this year.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, the winning the award was honestly, I mean, obviously it was just fantastic. The really cool part about it was kind of afterwards, just hearing from everybody either in the industry or followers on Twitter, subscribers on Baseball HQ that have been reading my stuff for years now. I mean, we're a paywall site, so a lot of our stuff doesn't get out there. So it was just really cool to be kind of recognized and just kind of hear from everybody who I've been interacting with either on Twitter or at First Pitch the last few years. It's just kind of cool to see it all come together. So that was the real kind of icing on the cake for that. It was great. So can't ride the high for too long though. Got to get back on the grind here.
Yep. No, it's all about producing, and hey, we got 2021 to fill. So jump into our strategy section. Tonight is about catchers and utility players. We're going to talk a bit about some strategy involved with both. So first of all, catchers, the big thing is knowing how to value them. And we talk a lot on the show. There's positional scarcity, market premium, whatnot. For catchers, we know that if they were going to play in a league and there was no positional format, you could pick any player, you would hardly have any catchers. I think if you're talking about the top 30 catchers in a 2-catcher, 15-team league, only about 7 of them would actually even qualify. Would be welcomed by any team to draft as an everyday player. So it's just a very, very weak position. So the question is, how do you account for this positional scarcity when you value catchers in your leagues?
Yeah, I mean it's I mean in general I focus on category scarcity and have been the last few years more than positional scarcity. But I mean catcher is the one exception to that rule, just because the replacement level, especially in a 2-catcher league, and I think we'll talk about that, is just so low that if you do wait on catchers in a 2-catcher league, you are getting some pretty bad stats across the board. So it is the one position where I do account for positional scarcity. I don't technically, and so in a lot of like your standard NFBC, there's 2 catchers, 15 teams, so there's 30 catchers. I kind of use my 20th to 25th ish catcher as my quote unquote replacement level and adjust from that. Just because I feel I can do a little bit better than just using the 30th overall catcher as my baseline. But yeah, I definitely do take that into account for the 2-catcher leagues, just because it's such a drop off, even after like the top 10, and then once you get into those part-time catchers near the bottom with pretty much no fantasy skill, it's really it's a cesspool. So you do have to account for it, in my opinion. And again, it's the only position really where I do make that adjustment at a position wide level.
How do you get that number, the 25th catcher? Because I'll tell everybody what I do. I come up with something a little bit different, and it's sort of formulaic, or there's a rationale. How do you get 25? Is that a gut feel for what you don't want to pay for at all?
Yeah, I mean it's a little bit arbitrary, but I think once you get back to like the true replacement level of like your 30th overall, I just feel like I can do a little bit better, and probably talk about streaming a little bit later, but like you can kind of stream catchers a little bit and play platoons and matchups and things like that to kind of squirm your way out of using that true 30th number 30 catcher as your replacement level. So I bumped that up just a little bit, just because, and maybe I'm too overconfident in my ability to wade through the end of the catching pool, but that's why I bump it up just a little bit, because I think I can outperform what that true 30th number 30 catcher can be. So that's why I bump it up just a little bit.
Yeah, well, for me, I have two reasons why I would want to bump it up. Number one is there's a historical finish. So, the reason, and Ryan was saying, use the 25th instead of the 30th. Technically, what you're paying for when you buy a catcher is you're not paying for a catcher's stats. If a catcher is projected to hit 10 homers and bat 200, you're not paying for those stats. You're paying for the privilege of not buying a worse catcher. Or more specifically, the privilege for not buying the last catcher, right? If you don't pay any money, if you say, I'm just going to pay $1 at the very end, draft a catcher in the very last turn, right? You can get a certain amount of statistics. When you buy any catcher, you're not paying for those statistics. You're paying for the difference between the worst catcher and that catcher statistic. That's where the whole scarcity and the whole bumping up comes from, because it's the marginal difference, not just the total stats, right? So that's why you're getting more. But if you look at, as far as projections go, let's say on a Z-score basis, the worst catcher, the 30th catcher, ends at -7 Z-score, really bad. But if you look at the way historically catchers have ended, there are more waiver wire catchers that come up into the above replacement pool than go down. It's one of the few positions that do that. There are catchers that aren't drafted that actually do better and come up and are worth money in the year. So what happens is the replacement level, the bottom 30th catcher, actually goes up from what was projected. If it's a -7, maybe it goes to -6. It depends on the format, but it bumps up a little bit. I use that point as the replacement level for the going forward, because that's really what you're buying towards. It's what I think is going to happen. And I take an average of the last 3 years and bump that up. It comes out to a little bit closer to about the 21st, 22nd catcher is to where you want to bump numbers up, a little bit higher. So I will have negative values for any catcher below 21 and only positive values earlier. And one other thing, though, we talk a lot on this show about market premium, and it's really about the market premium. If people are paying a certain amount or picking catchers in a certain round, it's okay to do that as long as you're getting a relative bargain. I found that if you use this historical jump, you're actually going to get a market premium that is pretty neutral to zero, so that your values all the way up and down the board are going to be fairly close to what catchers are going to go on average. So for that reason, the bump is closer to about the 21st level. A little bit math there. Ruben, what are you thinking about with catchers?
The problem with catchers is that they have to play, and if you have two of them, they're actually taking up spaces on your active roster. So you can pick your poison. You can spend the $23, $24 or the third or fourth round pick and get the JT Realmuto and not have to worry about it, and then say, you know what, let me go cheap and go with the worst catcher, because you know what, they'll even out. That doesn't necessarily work out. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't, because catchers tend to get injured, as we'll talk about later also. A lot of catchers, they only play 120 to 140 games. Is it worth it to really pay that much money on a player that's going to play maybe 20 or 30 games less than what a regular position player would play? I don't think so. I think I'd rather spend the money elsewhere and just go cheap. Go $1 catchers, because you know what? Just like you said, Ariel, there are catchers who are not being drafted, who you can get on the waiver wire, who actually have a better value later on.
So Ryan mentioned streaming, and let me go to you first, Ruvain, on this because you mentioned you want to go cheap in general. That would mean that you would be willing to stream catchers if you're buying just a dollar catcher or getting the last round catcher. If there's a catcher on the waiver wire that has perhaps a better schedule for the next week, maybe they're playing at Colorado, maybe they're in a better park, playing a crappy team, you would pick them up and use them. Is streaming catchers a viable strategy in both one and maybe even two catcher leagues?
One catcher league, 100%, because worst case scenario, you're going to get the 16th ranked catcher, which is not that bad, especially if they have a good week or they have good matchups. Two catcher league, you know what? Sometimes you're going to try and get that guy who's on his way up, or you think a catcher like you want to get Kyle Higashioka. Why? You know he's going to play at least once a week. Okay, if you know he's going to play at least once a week and he does well when he plays, you know what? He's playing the Orioles. He's in Baltimore. Let's play on that type of thing. I think that's maybe more worthwhile than spending money on a catcher.
Ryan, what are your thoughts? Are you streaming at all? I think one catcher league, it's definitely a viable strategy, right? Certainly, if you are picking the dollar, you should do that. Is it viable in a two catcher league?
I've done it in both, and yeah, definitely agree on the one catcher league. Like the replacement level, and especially if you wait on your catcher there, it's not that big of a gap, so you can definitely do it there. And two catcher leagues, it kind of depends. Like, I mean, obviously you can't stream in a draft and hold type format, which is what I've been kind of drafting at least early on in draft season here. So in a draft and hold where I can't do fab and stream, I will kind of prioritize catcher a little bit more and grab two full timers and then maybe handcuff them with their backups later in the draft, maybe 35th, 40th round, whatever, basically for free. But yeah, in two catcher leagues, I have streamed my second catcher as well, and I kind of like to do that as well. I mean, typically, what I like to do is get a full timer. Probably, I think the sweet spot that I've been in the last few years is grabbing kind of the 8th to 10th ish overall catcher. You're kind of waiting until like the 14th, 15th round for that pocket of value to come up, which is kind of where I like from like an opportunity cost standpoint. That's where I like to kind of grab my first catcher, and then I do stream my second catcher as well. There have been an increasingly large amount of platoon catchers out there on teams that play the lefty righty game. So if you play in a obviously in a daily format, you can stream that even more. But even in an NFBC where you have kind of a biweekly or you have that midweek switch, you can play that lefty righty game and stream that second catcher. It might cost you a roster spot, which in COVID years and definitely last year can hurt you. But one guy that just as an example was like Roberto Perez on Cleveland last year or 2 years ago. Was just a really good platoon bat, and that was someone who I would stream and get in on weeks where the platoons worked in his advantage, and then stream him out. So I found even in two catcher leagues, you're able to if you look at those platoons, those lefty righties, not just for like the actual splits, but really just for playing time. You're looking to kind of grab whoever's available on the wire, who's actually just going to be in the lineup or play for that period. So I stream in one catcher and two catcher leagues. In the two catcher leagues, I only try and do it for my second catcher, because if you're trying to stream two catchers every week, you're going to pull your hair out, and you do not want to do that. It's even worse than speculating on saves. So that's generally how I do it in the two catcher format.
Yeah, no, I was going to make the same point that in the two catcher format, I'm comfortable streaming one, but not two. To find two catchers that make any sense every single week is very, very hard to do. One, maybe you can come up with it. I do find myself, though, in drafts doing more streaming of the second catcher, but in auctions, I find that the prices are a little bit better as far as taking catchers a little bit early on. Is that something that you've seen? Do you think that people are overpricing, underpricing catchers in one catcher leagues, in two catcher leagues? I'll tell you off the bat, I think that people overprice the one catcher league. I think that there's a very good case to say, why draft a catcher at all? Just pick them up, in the last round. Do you find that to be true, that catchers are sometimes undervalued or overvalued in two catcher leagues?
Yeah. So yeah, to your point on one catcher leagues and punting, just that out of the way, Ariel, is yeah, I do the same thing. And actually, we did what we call the WRF League, Pacific Northwest based league, and we drafted that on Saturday night. And I waited for my last roster spot to grab my first catcher as a one catcher league,
Yeah.
just because there's really no, if you wait, you don't grab one of those early guys. There's really no reason to spend draft capital on that if you wait. So yeah, two catcher leagues, especially like I honestly haven't done too many auctions. So like the only thing that I have is I'm in AL Tout Wars, and that's even crazier because that's a two catcher league. It's only 12 teams, but it's AL only, and you get those dollar catchers, and those guys barely even play. So I think even in that format, I do think that a lot of guys kind of undervalue the catcher spot in those even deeper leagues because you are literally getting like zero production if you're spending a buck or two on an only league second catcher, and that really sets you back over the full season.
Yeah, no, I think two catcher leagues people do, especially in an auction, people do undervalue. As far as the one catcher, the reason why you shouldn't take a catcher early is because you're going to have smarter people, or I'm not going to say smarter, but other people in the league take catchers the last round. If you think about it, the gap between, we talked about it's all relative value. If you're drafting a catcher where you think they should go, but everybody else is saying, screw it, I'm just going to go last round, that's a huge value difference. It's a huge round difference. The difference between your catcher in the one league that you're going to get at the last round and anybody but Real Muto probably is not worth that much of a gap, right? You're not going to get that much production by getting the third best catcher in baseball than the 10th. So it's not worth taking a shot so early, being that people are waiting to the last time. That's really the reason behind it. Ruvain, let's ask you first on this one. JT Realmuto, I just mentioned him, is the top catcher. Now, we know there's an injury issue with him. Maybe you can talk about that. But the question is, his he has a high price tag. Is it worth spending on it, even if it's, he's a legitimate good player? He obviously is the player of the position that is most worth to take. But is he drafting too high? Is it also worth the risk? Because let's say he gets injured. In a two-catcher, 15-team league, you're dropping from Real Muto to nobody, and that money is out the window, and it's a crazy value loss. So is Real Muto too risky? Is his price too high? And what is his injury status?
Well, his injury status is that he did have a fracture in his thumb. They're going to supposedly he's going to be in a brace for about 2 weeks. And then hopefully he said he should be ready for opening day, which is not out of the realm of possibility because it is still only February. So I'm not too concerned about that. As for the risk of where people are taking Real Muto, he's going in the third round, fourth round, that range right now. Other players who are going that range, Jose Abreu, Whit Merrifield, Rafael Devers. Wouldn't you want to spend more capital on those guys who play close to 150 plus games every year as opposed to a catcher who I mentioned before may not play that many games? Plus, you have the injury risk. And remember, JT Realmuto was injured last year. He's getting up in age, which is also one of the reasons why I didn't want the Mets to get him, because he is getting up in age, and I'm a little nervous about these aging catchers. Age. Big thing with catchers. Right now, Realmuto is 29, 30 in that range right now, but he signed a contract for 4, 5, 6 years. He's going to have almost no value. He's going to be that second catcher already when it gets to the end of his contract. But when it comes to drafting, the risk is just way too high, and I'd rather have one of the guys I mentioned instead of taking Realmuto there.
And I think people are overvaluing him for the fact that there's no NL DH this year. If there's a DH in the NL, then his off days, or a good part of his off days, can be spent still at bat. But he's going to lose that, and I think he's going to get the lion's share. But I think that the amount of at bats he's going to lose is really going to knock him out of being worth a third, fourth rounder. I just don't see the value, and I think it's really risky. If he goes kablooey, there's nobody to pick up. Right, if an outfielder, a first baseman, goes kablooey, you pick somebody off the waiver wire, they're going to get a higher percentage of the statistics than Real Muto going to the floor. Of course, it also means that why Real Muto is so valuable is because he is much better than the rest, but the risk, of course, is greater, and I don't like that trade-off. Do you agree, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean the other thing too with Realmuto, and the DH is a great point because yeah, Realmuto played 8 games, 8 out of 47 games last year. I say played in air quotes, but I mean, he was the DH in 8 out of 47 games, so that's no longer obviously an option for this season. I think we are pretty close, but it sounds like the NLDH is not going to happen. The other thing with Realmuto that I do think that we haven't talked about is the speed, and that has propelled his value. He's one of the few catchers that runs and really runs successfully. He's always had a really good stolen base rate, but to kind of what Ruven was saying, like yeah, once you start to get over 30, like speed's one of the first things, especially behind the dish, that starts to wane. So I'm not sure if the stolen base upside is there anymore. I mean, he only did get more than 10 bags just once in his career, but he's had 8, 9 as recently as 2019. So you are getting that category production with pretty good playing time, but I don't think you can bank on that as a 30-year-old catcher starting to kind of go into that decline phase, and then you tack on the NLDH on top of that, and it's a tough it's a tough pick for me in the third round. That said, there are a lot of people, really smart people, who really like JT Realmuto and have benefited from his production in the last few years. And if I'm kind of reading between the lines of what Ruven said, is if you were on JT Realmuto in the third round before the injury, his ADP, I've seen him go down in the fifth or sixth round, and it sounds like the injury hopefully won't affect his 2021 season if we take him at his word and he's back by opening day. So if you do subscribe to the Realmuto theory, there is a case to be made that you are getting a round or two discount based on the injury news. So that'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But as of now, no, in the third round, it's a little bit too much for me, even with the injury.
Yeah, I mean, Realmuto's stock has been so on the rise since 2015. I'll read you his roto values in 15-team 5x5 format. $12, 18, 19, 25, 27, 29. The train just keeps going up and up. And I think people get caught up and they sort of see it still zooming, but at any point it can crash. He is 30. You don't expect it to crash, and I would not draft him as if to crash. But that's not to say that he is a little bit too overvalued. The one interesting thing I also want to point out is that his intra-projectional standard deviation, which means his category risk or his profile risk, how different his 5x5 category components are different from each other, is the lowest risk in all of fantasy baseball. He is the most even categorically all over the place of any single player. I like those kind of players because it's many paths to value. So he'll steal a bit less. He'll probably hit another homer or another run or another RBI. Or it doesn't matter if he's dinged in any one. Any one category is not a big impact to your overall total. You're not counting on him for something more than any other category, is what standard deviation projects, and he is the lowest. So that is a point in his favor. Great profile, but risky, and who the heck knows on that, and I think people are just pushing up way too much, and as Ruvain said, passing on some very bankable players elsewhere. Let's switch a little bit to utility-only players, and the biggest question we always get is, should you save a utility slot, not clog the utility slot with a utility-only player? Do you think that players are undervalued because people don't want to take utility players for that reason, and therefore, because of that, the price gets depressed? So there's often perceived value in drafting utility players, and certainly if you've grabbed Nelson Cruz in any of the last decade of years, you've been pretty happy every single year, and I'm sure you will be for the next 10 years until he turns 50. What are your thoughts? Are people doing it wrong at utility?
I mean, I think from a strictly like valuation standpoint, I mean, yeah, these utility guys, especially, I mean, the really good ones like your Nelson Cruz or Chris Davis with a K in his prime. From a strict valuation standpoint, I mean, yeah, those guys are being undervalued. But I mean, obviously the rub is that quote unquote clogging of the utility slot. How much is, and Ariel, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. I mean, how much is that quantifiable? How much is that worth? To not have that utility spot available to you, especially, and I ran into this last year a lot because I am kind of a Nelson Cruz guy. I always kind of grab him up when I can. But in COVID years, it really did hurt more than previously because there were so many games being canceled and contact tracing and things like that that you really needed to scramble a lot of weeks to field a lineup. And having someone in that utility spot did for me a few weeks last year. Caused some headaches, just not being able to move the pieces around the way that I could. Normally in non-COVID times, it's not that big of a deal. And I try and kind of, if I do go a utility guy, I will try and build around and prioritize some of the multi-position eligible guys even more than I normally would, just to kind of counteract that from a roster flexibility standpoint. But with COVID around it, and not to get too far off, but I fully expect we're going to have some of those similar headaches, at least in the first half of 2021. It for me was a bigger problem than it has been in years past, having that utility slot filled up. So again, interested to see, Ariel, if you've been able to quantify that, but I think it does make a difference when you're trying to field a squad with so many guys and teams not playing in schedules in flux like they were last year.
So the exact answer is that the perceived market discount for utility players is roughly $3 to $4 on average in a 5x5 15-team mixed setting. So, on average, if you pay for any player, you're going to get that $3 to $4 discount. And of course, you don't need a utility player. Like in a catcher situation, that market premium, it counts because you need to get a catcher or two. So it's okay to pay it. Here, you don't even need the utility slot guy, and they're giving you a market discount. It's almost like a win-win to me. I think actually, and maybe I'm wrong here, that because there's now more multi-positional players than ever, right? We love those multi-positional players, and there is more than ever. If you look at the second base pool, like half the pool are people that play in other positions as well. If you think about it that way, because there's many more multi-positional players, there are more opportunities to move people around. I don't think that utility clogging up or having a utility-only guy is as hurtful as usual, because a lot of the guys who play second base anyways play elsewhere, and so you can move them around. I think that the $4 market discount is too much. To me, a multi-positional player is probably about a $1. You should pay $1 over his price on the average, but you're getting a lot more than that on the discount on the utility slot. So I think people are unfair and taking too much. Do you agree with Vane?
I think it depends on the strategy coming into the draft. If you want to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to bulk up on speed, I'm going to spend all my major capital on speed guys, and you just need power guys, and you know you're going to get these utility guys at a discount, you're talking about guys who hit for power. You're talking about Yordan Alvarez. You're talking about Framil Reyes. Nelson Cruz, Jorge Soler, all these guys are big power guys. So if you need power and you want to boost up and you know you're going to have space because you have roster flexibility elsewhere and you have stolen bases elsewhere, then that's the way to go. And I think they're undervalued. I think they were undervalued in the days of David Ortiz. Nobody wanted him in some of the drafts I was in. He kept dropping and dropping, and I'm saying, why is he dropping? He hit so well. And way back in the day, Edgar Martinez, he hit for average, for power, for RBIs. He had everything, but he was DH only. And you know what? If your roster can fit it and it makes sense, then it's worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I would not personally in a draft or auction say that. Well, I just don't want the flexibility. I have to have the flexibility. I can't take a utility guy. I think if the guy has a nice bargain and it would fit into your usual bargain at the price point, I see no reason to grab the player right away. I just don't see it. Yeah, you agree, Ryan?
Ruven brought up a great point in that oftentimes, these DHs are DHs for a reason, right? They're not the most athletic, fast guys in the world. So it does have to kind of fit your roster build, not only from a position flexibility standpoint, which I kind of talked about before, but to Ruven's point, like you probably need to build some early steals to be able to make that work and make those puzzle pieces fit. But if you play your cards correctly from that aspect, you can absolutely kind of maximize that market inefficiency that you were talking about, Ariel. So just got to keep that in mind throughout your draft from a roster construction standpoint for sure.
Ruven, an entry question for you. A player that only plays DH, doesn't play the field, is he less likely to be injured in this season, or is it the same?
Depends on the player because a lot of these DHs sometimes we're talking about older DHs, they're going to break down anyway. So I wouldn't go according to that. But when they're in DHing, you still have to swing the bat. You still have to get on base. And if you're on first, you still have to go from first to third sometimes on singles, or they try to. And there's still a risk of injury there. No, they're not going to get injured in the field, but there's still other miscellaneous stuff. What if they have to slide into home plate and they get hurt that way? What if they're celebrating like Kendry Morales did and he jumped on home plate and he was out for the entire year? There's so many different things that can play into that when it comes to injuries for DHs. But I think the age factor is the biggest
Okay.
issue when it comes to injury.
Okay, so there's no special. You get saved because you don't play the field from injury. You're
No.
saying.
No, I mean,
Okay.
look at Shohei Ohtani. Nelson
Well,
Cruz last year
well,
missed a lot
Shohei
of time.
Ohtani is pitcher. That's a little bit of a different story.
He was still considered a DH though. So yeah,
Yeah.
and Yordan
Yeah.
Alvarez, he didn't play at all last year because he had two knee injuries,
Stanton.
and he's so young. He's 22, 23,
Yeah.
and he's not playing because of two knee injuries and two knee
Yeah.
surgeries.
Okay.
That's what I was going to chime in with. Is it's just ironic that a lot of these DHs are older guys, start to break down, but one of the key injury questions around the DH only guys is Jordan Alvarez, who's like 23 years old, and
Yeah.
so
I think it works the other way. I think it's you're a DH because you have the injury issues, possibly. Not that you're not going to have injury because they're going to put you a DH. It doesn't work the other way. If they were more mobile, then they wouldn't play DH in the first place, right? I guess that's the way to look at it. Now, we noted this at the end of our show last week, but it's worth noting again here since we're talking about utility-only players. When you're doing your values and you're doing your drafts, do not consider Marcell Ozuna as a utility-only player. Yes, he might initially only be allowed to be in your utility slot, but in terms of value, he's an outfielder. He's going to gain the outfield position really, really quickly because he's going to play in the National League, and the Braves will be forced to use him, and they paid him, so they want to use him. Colin Moran's another player that probably should gain third base eligibility. So when you're doing your valuations, assume that they're part of their outfield gives a small bump to Ozuna. So if you were going to get a discount for Ozuna from being the DH, my God, it's going to be even more because he's actually worth more as an outfielder. So just a little bit of tidbit of information. Ryan, you do this really cool thing that you call a Bloom board. Can you tell everybody what a Bloom board is? And then we'll talk about one of the Bloom boards that you have recently created.
Bloom boards has kind of been my thing here the last few years, and it's kind of funny, I've always done it for my own research and in terms of writing my own columns at HQ and really my own draft prep. And just recently, I mean, over I guess 2 years ago, started putting it out on Twitter and branding it and that sort of thing. But basically what they are just different types of filters from different types of data sources, from Fangraphs, from StatCast. You throw on NFBC data for the market price. You kind of have all these different sources of data. You can mix those together and put together some pretty cool lists of players, essentially, that meet certain thresholds. So I could look at, for example, something like a barrel rate from StatCast and throw a strikeout rate or a chase rate from Fangraphs and see who bubbles up for guys who don't chase but also barrel it up. And then one of the things that I really try and achieve with these Bloom boards is if I have a list of 10 guys, for example, that meet a certain chase rate and barrel rate, I'll just continue with that kind of example. Where it really comes into and shines is where, like, if I've got those 10 guys and the top 5 or 6 are guys I would normally expect, like a Juan Soto, a Freddie Freeman, that kind of validates what I'm doing in terms of kind of the predictability of some of the stuff that I'm looking at. But then if you then look at the bottom of that list in terms of like ADP, and you get, for example, like a CJ Crone is a Bloom boards extraordinaire, someone who has similar types of skills when you look at those thresholds, but's going a lot deeper in drafts. Those are the guys that I'm trying to kind of uncover with these types of Bloom boards. And the thing that I also say a lot too is like, It's the start of a conversation, because a lot of time, I mean, filters are completely arbitrary, right? I'm picking and choosing a certain threshold for a barrel rate or a strikeout rate or whatever it is. So I'm just trying to kind of illuminate guys that you wouldn't normally think of as being in the same stratosphere as some of your elite players. And then you can kind of take a look in a deeper dive at like a CJ Crone, who has always had the skills, didn't have a team until recently. But if you invested in CJ Crone early in draft season, he signs with the Rockies, and you could be off to a fantastic buy with someone like that. So long story short, that's what I do. I put those out on Twitter. I try to put them out probably once a weekday. It's gotten a little bit waylaid this past week without power here at the house, but back on the train this week. And so yeah, just follow me on Twitter at RyanBHQ, or just search for this hashtag Bloomboards, and you'll see everything come up. I put them all, just kind of the list in a little image on the tweet, and then I just try and add some context to certain players that jump out to me, and it's really fun. I get a lot of engagement from it, a lot of people chiming in on other players that show up in the list, and it just puts it's another way to slice and dice the data and look at players in a different way, and start that conversation. So it's something I really enjoy doing, and I think has a lot of value for people following along.
Yeah, I mean, if you highlight, here's 5 players. 2 of them are Mike Trout and Fernando Tatis, and by the way, these 3 also. That illuminates some people. It's sort of like maybe Ruben. I'm sure you saw this, where they show highlights of Dom Smith of the Mets swinging and Barry Bonds swinging, and it looks like they have the same swing. Did you see that one?
I did see it. It's very similar. They have a different build, different batting stance, but the follow through and the actual swing through the zone looks very, very similar.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Not a bad player to comp to, for sure.
Exactly. I think that's the point of your bloom boards. You sent one of your latest ones that I saw out there were talking about players who really gained an ADP from 2020 to 2021, and some of them caught my eye: Teoscar Hernandez, Trent Grisham, Framber Valdez, Zach Plesac. What maybe you can talk about some players that caught your eye on this latest bloom board.
Yeah, so the biggest thing in one of my, I guess, crusades, for lack of a better word, of this draft season is recency bias, and trying to kind of put 2020 in perspective as a season that was pretty wild and was only right 1/3 of a season. So what I tried to achieve with this one is looking at and I call it draft slot value, from 2020 draft to 2021, and see who are the biggest risers after just a 60 game season, from the NFBC ADP. And so I say draft slot value because I try to attach auction values on certain ADPs. So like, for example, if someone jumps from the 4th round to the 3rd round, technically it's only 1 round, maybe 15 picks. That's actually a more valuable or a bigger jump than someone later in the draft from like the 17th round to the 14th round. So that's how I kind of built this list. And yeah, it's definitely a list of interesting guys that a year ago you would not have looked at. Randy Arozarena in the 4th round. You would not have looked at Framber Valdez in the 6th round, or James Karinchak in the top 100. So it's those kinds of guys where it's like, a year ago they weren't even on our fantasy radars. Now they are. Should they be after just 60 games? And research has shown, and we've done a lot of this at HQ, and Ron Chandler actually dubbed this extreme regression drafting. Regressions are game's most powerful force, and it works both ways. So odds are a lot of these draft risers from a year ago are going to settle and regress back down, even according to their market price. So, and I think especially on a 60 game season where we are, in my opinion, overweighting it a lot in terms of a lot of the analysis that I'm seeing, I think that's a really profitable angle to take, is to kind of fade these risers in general. And I'm not saying every single one. And then on the flip side, kind of target these kind of recency bias rebound guys whose market prices have totally dropped after a bad 60 game season. So that's kind of the point of this board, was just comparing what we thought of these guys a year ago to what we think of them now.
Some great points from the 2020 Baseball Writer of the Year right there, Ryan Bloomfield. We're talking with Ryan Bloomfield from Baseball HQ. It's now time for our ATC player valuations here. And the name of the game on this show is, as you know, Ryan, you are a listener of the show. We don't talk about every single catcher or first baseman, but we talk about some potential bargains that ATC has highlighted. And the first one is Wilson Contreras of the Chicago Cubs. He's a guy that really has had a nice little career so far. His roto values in the past couple of years, 18, 11, 16, 20. As a catcher, you love that. That's consistent. His barrel rate remains high. His homer to fly ball rate was a little bit on the low for last year, but a rebound should be back, and 20 home runs might be likely, at least high teens for him. His strikeout rate is creeping up where his walk rate is going down, so I think his years of hitting 270, 280 are over. I think he's more of a 250 kind of guy, but what you're going to be paying for, aside from the power, is run production. He's going to hit somewhere in the middle of the lineup. Who knows who'll be left from that Cubs lineup, but for now it's intact, more or less. We're talking mid-60s homers and RBIs. He's a guy, if you look at the ATC projection volatility metrics, very low standard deviation of projections, so projections are in agreement here. His stats are very well spread across the categories. He's got a very low intra-projectional standard deviation. A lot of catchers do, but he has one of the lower ones as well. So we're talking about a stable guy who is not going to be a pain in any category. Value's been high all these years, maybe even a buying opportunity because he had a down year last year. Are you interested in Wilson Contreras, Ryan?
If I'm going to go early on a catcher, Contreras honestly is probably the guy. I think for me, he's right up there with Salvador Perez. I actually have him a little bit higher than Salvador Perez, and is going 3 rounds later in 15-team league. So Wilson Contreras, for me, for the reasons, Ariel, that you stated, kind of that consistency. He's kind of at that right kind of time in his career, 29 years old, doesn't have too much wear and tear, and actually has the 3rd most number of plate appearances of a catcher in the last 3 seasons. So Chicago plays him. They play him often, and that matters a lot in terms of value for catchers. So if I am going to go early, and Wilson Contreras is going in almost the 10th round to get arguably the number 2 catcher, in my opinion, is a little pocket of value that I would take the plunge on if I'm looking to kind of grab the bull by the horns in catchers. So I'm a Contreras fan. I like the profile, like you said, Ariel. The strikeouts are going up a little bit, but I still think he can kind of hit mid 250s, maybe 260, and still has some pop. So I like Contreras. I like the consistency, the floor, and the playing time there.
Yeah, and in an OBP league, he's undeniably the second best catcher. That OBP is fantastic compared to the batting average. Ruvain, what are your thoughts on Contreras?
Well, first of all, you mentioned his batting average. The last 4 years, listen to these batting average: 276, 249, 272, 243. Doesn't that mean he's going to hit in the 270s this year? I'm not saying he will, but the San Francisco Giants believe in the every other year thing, so you never know. His home run to fly ball rate was down from his career average, but it's probably going to go back up because he increased his launch angle, and his barrels were the same in 2019 and it was 2020. His soft contact rate was the lowest of his career. He's hitting more line drives, and he's batting 4th. He's batting cleanup, so he's going to drive in a lot of runs. So this is a guy to buy.
Yeah. My research has shown that the more profitable, or I should say the better return on investments for catcher, especially in an auction, come from the second-tier catchers. We're not talking about the elite Real Muto, the super elite Real Muto, and the elite Salvador Perez, but from catchers number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those actually have very good return on investments I've seen over time from my research. And why a lot of these catchers we might mention today are of the more upper echelon. Like, I'm not predicting the very, very low catchers to go. I think that it's just extracting value from where it's been a good return on investment. Our second catcher today, Yasmani Grandal, and that brings us today to the Injury Guru's Trivia of the Week.
So we're going to be talking about Yasmani Grandal now, and he happens to be 32 years old. And the catcher we're going to talk about after this is Travis d'Arnaud. He's also 32 years old. Grandal's actually 2 months older. Grandal has caught 800 games so far in his career. How many more games did he catch than d'Arnaud? In the range. It's going to be kind of hard. I'll give you the answer. d'Arnaud has caught a total of 489 games. That's a
Whoa.
difference of 311
Wow.
games. Now, both of these guys, they're completely different paths. d'Arnaud was a high prospect, traded multiple times. Grandal made his way up slowly, and made it to where he is now. But Grandal seems to be the much more durable guy. He was on pace for the same numbers last year that he was on pace for 2018. All his peripheral numbers don't show any decline yet, and he's batting right now, according to Roster Resource, third in a very potent lineup.
For me, it's Grandal. He's the kind of guy where the profile is kind of vanilla, especially and I'm talking about batting average leagues only. Like Grandal could easily be a batting average suck and go below 230, and there are just a lot of guys later in the draft with a similar type of profile for me than Grandal. So I look at like playing a rebound card with Mitch Garver or even Gary Sanchez, who has more power than Grandal, and since batting average can be so volatile. You never know. Sanchez could out hit Grandal from a batting average standpoint. So for me, I'm off of Grandal just because the low batting average, high power profile, even at catcher, you can find guys with similar types of skills going in the 13th, 15th round range in 15-team leagues. Whereas with Grandal, you are paying a pretty decent premium in the 10th round for someone who could really hurt you in batting average. The other thing to kind of keep an eye on is, yes, Chicago does have the DH slot open with Encarnacion out of town, but let's see what happens with Andrew Vaughn. I do think maybe after some service time games, Vaughn's going to be their DH. So Grandal heavily leans on the DH when he's off, and that's how he's able to kind of save his legs and rack up playing time. But yeah, for me, it's more just there's similarly skilled catchers available later in the draft, and when I see that, I tend to always kind of go for those similarly skilled guys that are cheaper. And Grandal for me is just a little bit too much given the profile.
All right, so I don't really see them as very different value-wise. They're going in the 9th round within picks of each other. So to me, it's whoever is cheaper, and I'm not really even looking. In terms of the value, Grandal, we're talking the last couple of years of roto value, 14, 11, 19, 20, 16. So it's somebody who's producing that value. Projections are super tight on him. His interprojectional standard deviation is in the high 2s. He's even got negative skew, so there's even a case that he's going to do even better. Unlike Contreras, Grandal walks quite a bit. Contreras, I mentioned, has a high OBP, and that's why he's up there in on base percentage leagues. But in terms of the difference between batting average and OBP, my goodness, Grandal is 14% career walk rate. That is enormous. So he has got an even bigger push in an OBP league as compared to Contreras. The strikeout rate is also high. You don't like that, and you're talking a much lower possibility for batting average. So yeah, he is a batting average liability, whereas Contreras probably is not as much. But again, we're talking catchers, so you're going to expect it. What I like from Grandal is the run production and the power. I think that there's a good possibility that Grandal beats Contreras in at least 3 out of the 5 roto categories. I think that the lineup on the south side is far better, and we're talking close to 70 runs and RBIs as opposed to mid-60s. And I think the power can even approach 25, 30, maybe even 30. He had 28 homers back in 2019. I think it's a great lineup in Chicago. There's a lot of chances for runs and RBIs. Altogether, I think the package is really, really similar. So I'm not even going to pick one. I think it's whoever comes cheaper. And as we say on the show, when you have two players of the same position or statistics around each other. It's called the hot spot. So if you are inclined to take a catcher in this round, just write Contreras/Grandal, and you can get one of the top catchers in your league. Travis d'Arnaud, Ruvain mentioned. You go first, Ruvain, on Travis.
Well, Travis d'Arnaud, like I mentioned, hasn't played more than 112 games in a season, and he did that back in 2017. He was very, very lucky last year. His BABIP was 411, and his K rate was up. So he must have been doing something right, eating those Wheaties, doing something right. But he's a so-so catcher. I'm not high on him. I've never been high on him, even when he was with the Mets. Believe it or not, I've never been high on him. His ground ball rate was up. His fly ball rate was down, which is not good for a catcher. The only thing that he has going for him is that there's really no one behind him. His backup is Alex Jackson, who's not really anything right now. Now, the Braves are actually rumored into thinking about getting JT Realmuto during the offseason. That's because they need a second catcher. So I wouldn't be surprised if they sign a second catcher just to back up d'Arnaud, just as insurance, just like anyone else. If you draft d'Arnaud, I think you should have another catcher as insurance.
I feel like this is one of the catchers that the Tampa Bay Rays took a look at and said, we can make something of you, and they sure did. What are your thoughts on the Atlanta backstop?
Yeah, no, you guys covered him. You guys covered him really well. Obviously, he hit 320 last year. That's not gonna stick. It's just funny how d'Arnaud was such an injury. I mean, every single season he hit the IL. 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. The last couple years, I mean, 2019 was recovery from Tommy John and then COVID last year. So he's actually kind of had the opposite path of someone who started out really injury prone and hasn't been. But similar to Grandal, I mean, great lineup. I love the Atlanta lineup, and so he's serviceable. But I still think that injury risk is there a little bit. Another guy who played 7 of his 44 games at DH last year. So I kind of sound like a broken record here, but that's going to be gone from d'Arnaud. So you're not going to get that same number of plate appearances on a kind of a per game basis that you were expecting to get in 2020. So a fine target if you kind of want to fish in that 10th, 11th round. Going to give you more batting average than Grandal, but not as much power. So just kind of see where that fits with the rest of your team and go from there. But I don't have a major kind of different. I don't see a major difference between Grandal and d'Arnaud in batting average leagues.
Oh, I think d'Arnaud is a little bit safer in batting average. I mean, the Statcast numbers are just fantastic with him, with the barrel rate and the huge exit velocity, and he is having more line drive. Look, the Braves trusted him last year, batting him cleanup in the playoffs. What does that tell you? I mean, you had Freeman, Acuna, and they batted d'Arnaud's cleanup. I think the Braves really see something in him. I think the batting average is more stable than you think. I think that, and you know what? There aren't that many catchers who give you that batting average. And if you can find one of them, then it's just a great pad to your batting average. You're going to do so much better in batting average than the others if you're getting a 260 guy, whereas somebody else is rostering a 220 guy at the very end.
I was just gonna say that's absolutely right, and like the batting average floor for catchers, there aren't many guys like that, and those go to the guys that really can't hurt you. If at the very least they're racking up plate appearances and getting hits, and obviously the counting stats, the runs, RBI that go with it. So that's a great point.
Yeah, and the homers, I think they're super safe. I mean, he's always been a mid-teens homer guy, and now he has this consistent Statcast drama with he just crushing the ball. I think I'm projecting only 18 homers on ATC. I think that's so doable. I would probably take the over if I knew he was going to not get injured. I think he is a much safer person than you think, and it's a good profile to have, especially in a two-catcher league. I think it really fits in, and it's so unique as a catcher. Other than the stolen bases, I mean, this is close to Realmuto's productivity. Well, not exactly. I'm making that up. But I like the blend of the profile very nicely. It's not the typical catcher profile, put it that way.
Well, I mentioned all the games that he missed. That can be a positive for him too, because he's older, but he doesn't have all that wear and tear in him. So it can go both. You can think of it both ways. You can think of it positively if you want to.
Yeah, that's the old question. Do you trust somebody that's got a lot of mileage on their arm as a pitcher? Well, on one hand, they're super reliable. They've done it. But on the other hand, they've got a lot of mileage. So you should
I was
trust
just
them
going to bring
less.
up that starter comparison. Like the classic is Felix Hernandez, who was an old, 27-year-old, and a Jacob DeGrom, who, that the mileage and age is completely different for those kinds of guys. And I think there is that comparison there with catchers for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Let's go to the next one. Pedro Severino of the Baltimore Orioles. This is a little bit lower down, but ATC shows it's a relative bargain to what you're getting. It's only going for about a $2 average auction price, and he might be a little bit worth that on a relative basis. If you do the math, I have him projected as negative $1, but again, we talked about that market premium for catchers. What are your thoughts on Pedro Severino? Any interest, Ryan?
I mean, not really. I'm not excited to, if I walk away from the draft table with Pedro Severino, like, yeah, I mean, it's nothing I'm getting excited about. The thing that I will say though is he is from an ADP standpoint, he's one of the last usable catchers in a two catcher format. So if you're getting deep into starting to get towards the end game in your two catcher league, and Severino's one of the kind of the last few guys available, just know that if you don't take the plunge on someone like him who's going just outside the top 300, you absolutely then are going to have to play the streaming game or kind of take a complete loss at the position. So Severino is one of those kind of final guys where he's available, he's going to play for Baltimore, hitting a pretty good park, and after him, it falls off really quick towards unusable guys. So yeah, again, not excited to grab him, but if I need to get that second catcher and I don't want to kind of punt that spot, he's one of your last choices, and he'll be fine. I mean, we're at HQ, we're projecting a 240 batting average with 14 homers. Like, that doesn't sound great, but for a second catcher going outside the top 300, that'll do. And I don't really see much ceiling from that. But again, at that point in the draft, you're just trying to get guys who are going to play every day, and Severino fits that bill.
Yeah, I actually like that projection better than ATC. ATC has only 11 homers, and I think that's low. One thing that when Ruben and I were going through this position player by player, we thought that his playing time was light. I think that a lot of the projections that are out there are showing him getting at bats in the low 200s, and we think for our own personal rankings, we're bumping him up higher in the at bats, which translates to counting stats directly. I think it's a guy who's pretty stable. He's a guy who his strikeout rate's only 20% or so, which means that there is not a batting average floor to drop, meaning, sure, he's only at 240, but that won't drop to 210. That'll stay somewhere around the area. Not a big ceiling, but you know what you're going to get with them, and that's a value as well, especially with that low catcher value. Good ballpark. Get a somewhat decent spot in the lineup. I think it's a guy to take a good flyer on as your second catcher, and just to give you some counting stats above and beyond what the market is pricing him for. Ruben?
The only thing I'd be worried about is when are the Baltimore Orioles going to bring up their top prospect, Adley Rutschman?
Yeah.
That's the only thing that runs into, and that's why I think people are not giving those counting stats as much as at bats. Right. But he had all his peripherals were the same last year as they were in 2019, and he was on pace to 15 homers and batting 250, which at a catcher at this level is not that bad. It's just going to be about him, about the playing time, and when the Orioles decide to actually make the switch.
You think, Ryan, any chance that Adley Rutschman comes up mid-season, end of season, late season? Not at all. Any thoughts?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. I mean, the one thing I will add is like, and HQ research has shown this a lot, is a lot of your kind of top catcher prospects, there's just so much to pick up and learn at the position that a lot of these guys don't take off right away. Like your Buster Posey's kind of the exception to that rule when he was brought up. But I think even if Rutschman gets brought up, I think it would be kind of I don't think they're going to throw him into the fire. It would be still more of like a timeshare. So I think Severino's pretty safe from a playing time standpoint. If Rutschman comes up, it won't be till probably till the second half of the season, and at that point, you're already getting pretty good playing time floor from Severino. So that's not really too much on my radar with him.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's why I think that the at bats are low for whoever's projecting. Most of the FanGraph sites projecting the 200. Curious, what does HQ project for at bats for Severino?
Yeah, so we do our playing time projections by like percentages of the team's
Okay.
kind of total group, and so we've got him at 60% catcher and
Oh,
10% DH. So we've got Severino actually at 400 at bats. So
oh, there you.
we're
Oh,
pretty keen on his playing time for this year.
right. So it's even more than ATC. So I guess you would agree with that. At least HQ numbers agree with my sentiment that these numbers are a little bit low. That he'll probably get more, and that the Adley Rutschman, if he does come up, won't be the lion's share of the playing time. He'll still be the Pedro Severino will still be the main catcher. So that's interesting. Go to another situation that I think bears worth looking at. Danny Jansen and Alejandro Kirk up in Toronto. I know some people are high on Danny Jansen, and there are some things, some good interprojectional volatility metrics for Danny Jansen. I don't think he's a great player. I think that the Blue Jays are going for it. Kirk already came up and showed up in the majors last year. Even though he might get some more seasoning to start this year, I think he either comes up right away or takes over as the main catcher, or at least gets a nice share of the playing time as we go on. Alejandro Kirk, we're talking a guy who was projected for a 270 batting average. We're talking probably one of the highest projections in all of the catcher position, and it's legit. Some power too. I think Kirk is just somebody that bat is so ready, and I don't know if they have enough room there in Toronto to get him in the DH spot, but I think they want to bring him up. They showed last year that they were willing to bring him up. Danny Jansen, he's on the decline. Look at his batting average. 247, 207, 183. I think the time is ticking for him. He did show some promise last year. His walk rate was 14%, but his strikeout rate is also ticking up. There's some good hope for him. There's some power metrics to indicate that he might have a bump, but then there's metrics to indicate that he's going to get on base much less. It's a mixed bag with him. I think he gets the first shot in Toronto, but I think it's a quick hook for Kirk. So if I'm in a draft and hold situation, if I'm in I'm drafting Kirk as a backup to Jansen. I think that's the way to do it for sure. In a redraft league, mixed league, regular standard league, it's hard to pick Kirk if he's doesn't have a starting position. He's somebody I think that you have to monitor really closely for the situation. And if you believe in him, I guess Jansen's okay to pick up in the meantime, as long as you think you can somehow get him on the waiver wire a week or so before he comes up. Any thoughts on that, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm a little bit more optimistic on Jansen than it sounds like you are. Yeah, the batting average, like career 208 hitter and 550 at bats, like that's really not good for Danny Jansen. But he doesn't strike out a ton, and he hits line drive, so he's got a career 21% line drive rate, and I mean that an above average strikeout rate. So I think the ingredients are there for a better batting average. The kind of the age old question is his career whatever 230-ish BABIP, is that his baseline over 550 at bats, or is that still a small enough sample size where we could expect that to kind of tick up a little bit? So I of these two, and definitely from a playing time standpoint, Jansen I think is going to start. Great lineup to hit in, even though he will be hitting towards the bottom of Toronto's lineup. But I'm actually fairly, along with like Severino we were just talking about, I'd probably take Jansen ahead of Severino at that top 300 ADP. I just think there's a little bit more batting average upside looking at kind of the deeper metrics that he's shown so far in his career. Again, nothing to get like super excited about, but I do think there's a decent chance that Jansen's playable, and that's about where he's going in the draft. That's about as good of praise as you can give some of these guys. So,
Yep, fair enough. Ruben?
Well, Danny Jansen, I'm a little bit nervous and a little bit optimistic, just like both of you guys. It's a little of both. His BABIP last year was 190. I mean, that's very hard to do. His home run to fly ball rate went up, his barrels went up, but his hard hit rate went down, which that doesn't make any sense. It's either one of the it's something wrong there. And with Alejandro Kirk there, and the Blue Jays expected to be at least the second best team playing in Florida this year, then you know what? Kirk is going to get the batting, is going to get more time because they want to win now. They have a team that they think they can make the playoffs, and you know what? They're going to push it. And Kirk, I'm nervous about. Kirk, this is the first time last year he played above high A ball, and he only had like 25 plate appearances, so it's really, really, really hard to know what you're going to get with him. He's going around the 21st round, which is actually before Severino, I'd rather have Severino, which is a more of a given thing. Even Tucker Barnhart, I think I know what I'm getting with him. With Alejandro Kirk, who's to say you're not getting the same thing like Danny Jansen? Now, the Blue Jays seem to be pretty good with picking catchers. They had Darno before, and they have a lot of history of nurturing and bringing up these catchers. So you want to believe in that, then you believe in Alejandro Kirk, but I just don't believe in it.
All right, let's switch gears now to the utility-only players. I've identified 3 of them that you might be interested in, according to ATC projections. First one is Franmil Reyes. Ryan, what do you think of this 25-year-old kid from Cleveland?
The Franimal. I like the profile. It's a pretty bland one though. So like he's going in the probably 10th round, just outside the top 150. It looks like. The question with Franmil Reyes is that BABIP, is that batting average going to hold? Franmil Reyes hit 275 last year with a pretty atrocious strikeout rate. Obviously has pretty light tower power, but no steal game at all. 0 career steals in over 550 at bats. So on the plus side, it is an age 25 hitter who has hit 37 home runs as recently as 2019 and hit 275 last year. Like that, if that all sticks and he's on a Cleveland team where he is going to play every day in a lineup where, I mean, we like to bag on Cleveland for, trading Francisco Lindor and that sort of thing, but that lineup's really not that bad. Still have Jose Ramirez in there, Eddie Rosario, that sort of thing. So the lineup's not bad. It's just it's a team construction thing. Franmil Reyes, and I was kind of hinting at this earlier with Grandal. Those low batting average, high power guys are almost a dime a dozen. Now, I don't want to sell Franmil short with that because there aren't too many guys that have been able to approach 40 home runs going outside the top 150 with a passable batting average. But just know that profile is pretty vanilla, and you can get similar type of skills guys later in the draft. So. That's kind of where I stand on him. We'll see where that batting average goes. We're projecting at HQ 257 and 34 bombs from Franmil Reyes over 550 at bats. So we'll see what happens.
I totally disagree with. I think that he's a winner. I don't have that many different statistics than for ATC than you mentioned, and at that price, he's going in just at the end of the 10th round. We're talking a couple rounds bargain here. We're talking about a guy who can hit 40 home runs. He had 37 just 2 years ago. His lifetime barrel rate of 13%, and it's been consistent every year. I mean, there's no steals. ATC's projecting 0.2 steals. So every 5 years, he'll steal
5 years.
Yeah, 5-year return on that. He's got a very good walk rate. The problem is his strikeout rate. But aside from that, we're talking mega run production in a better than you think lineup, as you mentioned. He could hit 90 RBIs, 80 runs, 40 homers. This reminds me of Adam Dunn, but a much better batting average than Adam Dunn. I think that, he's shown he's a lifetime average of 263. Now, that might be high, but high 250s, I think, is more than doable. That's what I'm projecting. I think this is an extraordinary player that could be a 4th-round player that you're getting in the 10th round. I'm high on this guy. I don't see any downside risk. Like, what's the risk? He hits 240. He's not going to turn into Joey Gallo here. I'm high on this guy. Ruben?
I think his downside is that he hits between 25 and 35 home runs. I mean, that's the downside for him. The problem last year is that he lowered his home run to fly ball rate. His hard hit rate was down, so those things can bounce back. Now, one guy I'm thinking about. I was looking at his stats. I'm thinking who else in the Cleveland Indians at that age was a little bit similar to this. Now, ATC projection for Franmil Reyes for his age 26 year is 35 homers, 91 RBIs, 260 average. Carlos Santana, age 26, produced 20 homers, which, he increased that, 74 RBIs, and a 268 average. Cleveland knows what they're doing when they're getting these home run hitters. I have all the confidence in the world that Cleveland knew what they were doing when they traded for him, and I think he's going to have a bounce back year.
Just the last thing that I didn't mention was the ground ball rate too with Franmil Reyes, like a 50% ground ball rate last year. Let's see if he can. If he makes that launch angle adjustment. I always say this, and Eno Saris has said this too at First Pitch Arizona. I'd much rather have a guy who has the hard hit capability of like a Framil Reyes who can then adjust. It's easier to adjust, make a launch angle change than just, deciding to hit the ball harder. That's a skill that you either have or you don't. So let's see where that ground ball rate goes with Framil Reyes. I think a lot's
Yeah.
going to kind of hinge on that for this season.
Yeah, I just don't see the downside. There's more upside than downside here. And at the pick, like, if I told you that he's going to only hit 30 home runs, with everything else, is he's still a bargain, right? You can do a sensitivity test. What if he hits only 28 home runs? It's probably worth then the value, right? I don't see him dropping to 20 too. I don't see much downside here, and especially run production. If he bats in the middle of that lineup and stays healthy, it's going to come. Two more guys. Jorge Soler. I've noticed a lot of similarities between Soler and Chris with the K Davis. His power indicators are as high as ever. StatCast is showing he's hitting the ball hard as ever. He walks a lot, and it's been steady. Strikeout rate has been going up, so I don't think he will hit anywhere near 260s as he has been. I think we're talking a 240s player. So I think this is a guy who can fit the profile, and similar to what you said, Ryan, I think that this is a very similar profile that you see the 85 RBI, 25, 30 homer guy with the 250 average. That's Jorge Soler. He's not unique, and in the utility slot is a net bust. Framil Reyes, again, I have a tick higher than that because I think the average is a playable average, but at this level, Soler has just so many other people that have the same qualities, the same profile. It's not unique and not that interesting. Certainly if he drops, and I think Soler in an auction to me is more likely to come to me than in a draft, because maybe his auction price falls to $7, and I say, oh, okay, he's a $13 player, $7-8. That makes sense for the value. I don't see me grabbing him in a draft. You have thoughts on Soler?
You covered him great. The one thing I'll add, and I agree, like a lot of that profile is the same. The one thing I'll add is he had that oblique strain that put him on the IL in September last year. Whenever I see that, and then I'm kind of wading into Ruven's territory here with injury analysis, I wonder, was that bothering him throughout the year? And then he finally in September, Kansas City's out of it, said, okay, I'm gonna shut it down. I'm gonna go on the IL, played hurt, and that sort of thing. You could take that and say, okay, so maybe we throw out 2020. That's a mulligan. He was playing hurt, and he had the oblique injury, and I expect to bounce back. The downside to that is Soler also had oblique problems in 2015 and 2017. So this is kind of a recurring theme for somebody who's not young anymore, age 29 season. So I do wonder if the down year was, how much the oblique strain played into that. And if you think it did, and you read those tea leaves and then it did, there's definite bounce back potential because, like a year ago, he was coming off a 48 home run, 117 RBI season. Like no one's expecting that again. But if you're playing that, playing hurt injury rebound card, that's kind of the case to be made for Soler. So yeah, Ruven, I'd be interested to get your take on that with the kind of the history of oblique injuries, but how much that might have impacted him last year.
Well, oblique injuries tend to keep someone out anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks on average the last couple of years. And the season last year was 8 weeks. So a lot of times players will hide the injury or change their swing a little bit just so they can continue to play. And I think that's what he did because he was still on pace to hit 28 home runs even with the oblique injury. My question is, and I think he's going to be completely healthy. I don't think it's going to be an issue. And I think he'll have the same power he always had. However, his BABIP last year was 317 and he batted 228 with a 317 BABIP. That scares me. That's getting into Adam Dunn territory. That's if his BABIP goes back to his career down a couple like 20, 30 points, his batting average is going to be even lower. If he's healthy and he's able to swing normally and he's got his regular swing back, then that's fine. But otherwise, I'm very nervous with him.
Yeah, 48 homers back in 2019. That's not that far ago. And you're right. If he was concealing, maybe a 30 homer projection is light for him. And by golly, that would be, as I said, Chris Davis, who would hit 247 and hit about 38 homers. So I think he fits that profile, which is fantastic. But there are some others available, and I prefer Franmil so much more. Let's go to the last player, Shohei Ohtani. The question is health. He's going to be pitching. If I'm the Angels, I probably would just say the hell with the pitching. Just hit. You're probably more valuable in a fantasy standpoint. He's more valuable as a hitter. If you're in a league with weekly transactions, you are not drafting Shohei Ohtani as a pitcher at all. You are drafting him as a hitter only. If you are in a league with daily lineup switches, then it becomes more interesting because you can use Ohtani for both, and the value that you get is almost adding up the two, but even better because it's only one roster spot. Like you're getting all the pitching and all the hitting from him, and you only have to take up one roster slot. So he's the single biggest difference in daily lineup guys versus weekly. He's a 2015 guy in my opinion. That's what he's been on the pace for his career. He's still young. He's only 26. It's a question of health, but he is going in the 17th round. And as a hitter, 2015, 15 stolen bases in the 17th round with a decent power stroke and batting average. I mean, he's hit in the 280s the first 2 years of his career. This is the value that's enormous to me. Ruvain, what's his issues with health is... of course, I should mention, though, that being that he pitches, he's not going to bat the day after, the day of, and the day before he's going to pitch, so the at-bats could be hindered by that. Plus, the Angels have a DH problem. Who's going to DH? Pujols? You got Jared Walsh. Like, I can see him losing some at-bats, but on a per-at-bat basis, this guy is phenomenal. Ruvain, can you talk to his injury and everything else?
Well, he is healthy. He's pitching. The one thing that they're concerned about right now is that his velocity is down 2 miles per hour already. He may just need time to build that back up. The Angels are thinking about going with a 6-man rotation, which may get him more at bats. But I think where he's going right now as a hitter, he is so valuable. 5 out of the 6 projections I saw, like you mentioned, 20 homers, 15 stolen bases. You know who does that also? Byron Buxton, and he's going 8 rounds earlier. I mean, it's all a matter of playing time for Ohtani. Just like you mentioned, where's Pujols, Jared Walsh going to play? Where he's not really going to, Ohtani's not going to play the outfield. He's going to DH. So there's really, he either DHs or he pitches. He's probably going to DH 3 times a day, 3 times a week. I'm sorry, and pitch once a week. You know what? Those 3 times a week that he pitches, he is so valuable to you that you know what? He's worth drafting, and he can give you basically the same stats as Byron Buxton, and he probably won't get as injured as much because his injury was a pitching injury. It wasn't an injury running into a wall. It wasn't an injury, a broken finger or something like that. I think overall you can get more value as a hitter from Shohei Ohtani than Byron Buxton.
Yeah, and that extra, if they do go to a 6-man rotation, at least for part of the year, that will help his value quite a bit. He'll get an extra set of at-bats every week. Any thoughts on Ohtani? He's so cheap, isn't he?
I mean, he's cheapest he's ever been. And when you kind of play the long game in the careers of some of these guys, I mean, that's when you want to buy in, is when these guys are at the cheapest that they've ever been, and get out conversely when the price is highest than it's ever been. In Ohtani's case, yeah, HQ we're projecting 16 homers, 11 steals, 273 batting average, and essentially part-time duty. And yeah, I mean, that has a ton of value. The thing is, the Angels are committed to, either they made a pledge to Ohtani that he's going to see this through and try and do the pitching thing. Fully agree, by the way, if you are drafting Ohtani, you are using the hitter version. But I get why the Angels are doing it from a real baseball and team construct standpoint. They need pitching a hell of a lot more than they need hitting. So I can see why they're trying to see this through with Ohtani. It'd be interesting because if, say, for example, I mean, you don't want him to get hurt again, but let's say they scrap the pitching experiment in April. They just say it's not going to work out, and instead, Ohtani, you're going to DH 6 games a week. From a fantasy standpoint, you just got kind of Ruvenda what you were saying, like a Byron Buxton, even better than a Byron Buxton in the 17th round. So that's kind of what you're hedging on, is is the Angels giving up on Ohtani pitching experiment, because if that happens, the price is ripe for profit given the per game production. Just so frustrating to own, having a guy who at least currently is only going to play 3 times a week. It's really tough when you're sitting there Sunday night, Monday morning, trying to make your lineup decisions, and you see Ohtani obviously not pitching Sunday, or not hitting Sunday, not hitting the day before, day after, that sort of thing. It's tough to put somebody, even of his skill, who's only playing 3 times a week when you're sitting there Monday morning and trying to make those weekly lineup calls. So that's kind of the worst case with Ohtani. But yeah, I mean, the skill is there. If he gives up pitching, and focuses on hitting, that's going to be a major boon where he's going in drafts for sure.
Yeah, and to the listener, the most important thing is to know the rules of your league. He might be eligible only at pitcher in your league, in which case, forget it. He might be eligible only at hitter. There might be 2 versions of Ohtani, the hitter Ohtani and pitcher Ohtani. There might be one that you can use for each. And, of course, we talk a lot on this show about redraft weekly lineups, but this is a case that if you're in a daily lineup, he's worth a lot more. He's going to be undervalued for a lot of reasons, and of course his ADP in that kind of league would be a lot higher as well, because people realize that too. We have time for one question, one mailbag question. Jacob Siegel asks, as someone playing Roto for the first time, with all my league mates having never played either before, what strategy would you suggest taking about catchers? Also, quick thoughts on Will Smith and Sean Murphy. Want to take a stab at that, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I think we hit from the strategy side. I think we hit that pretty good in the first half. I mean, one thing that I'll just kind of wrap that part up with is, look at the catcher pool, and since the question was it's their first year in Roto specifically, the learning curve with Roto is learning to balance those categories. So we've covered different guys like a Darno or a Wilson Contreras who give you that batting average, as opposed to a Grandal who's not giving you that batting average. Determine, even in draft, which type of catcher fits your build the best, so that you're the most balanced, is what I would say from a strategy standpoint. And then kind of, listen what we said at the top in terms of streaming, if it's 1 or 2 catcher leagues. Definitely thought we covered that really well. So, in terms of Sean Murphy, not enough experience for me yet to really dive in. I think the market's really giving Murphy a 164 ADP for someone with 170 career at bats. I go back to that research that we've done with the learning curve for catchers at the major league level. It is a tough transition, and for me, there's not enough of a track record there. Even though the projections look pretty good for Sean Murphy, I think there's some definite performance risk in those projections. And I think there's a pretty low floor there for someone who is not and hasn't really gone through that adjustment period against major league pitching. So I'm kind of out on Sean Murphy at the price, the park, and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, I think Murphy is somebody that is way too expensive in a 2-catcher league for where he's going. In a 1-catcher league, though, I think that's the kind of guy you want to take a stab on for your last pick, or maybe just go to the second to last round and take a stab on Murphy, and you'll be happy you did. Will Smith was the other catcher. I think he's expensive. I think he's very good. But I think he's expensive. I also think that because of no NLDH, his value takes a hit. I mean, the Dodgers were using him down the stretch as an NLDH, which is propping up his value in projections and his value going forward as perception. So I think the Dodgers, I think they think that they're going to win the World Series this year anyways. So they're going to, I'm not going to say do screwy things, but they're going to just say, catch half. They don't need him to catch extra. They'd rather just have him fresh for the playoffs. I think that he's just too expensive, and he's overvalued for his price. Great player. I mean, on a per-at-bat basis, one of the best. But I think for the counting stats you're going to get, just a little bit too expensive. Ruben?
If the Dodgers say that Will Smith will catch every day and be their everyday starting catcher, then he could be a number 1 catcher at the price he's going at right now. So you know what? I'd be willing to get those. Even in 90 games, he'll hit 20 home runs. He'll give you 20 plus home runs, 60 plus RBIs in those 90 games. But you know what? If he played 120 games, 130 games, you're talking about JT Realmuto territory. So he's a guy, if you have a hunch and you think he's going to play every day, then go ahead. As for Sean Murphy, again, just like Ryan said, the sample size is way too small. I'm not ready to commit on him yet. If it was a one catcher league and it was a 15-team league, would I spend $1 on him? Yes. Why not? Because there are a lot worse catchers out there. But he's not on my radar as my number one catcher.
Yeah, good points. Ruvain, injury and update time. Go for it.
All right. Well, since we're talking about catchers, I'll mention a bunch of catchers. We have Kurt Casale, who actually revealed this past weekend that he underwent hamate surgery in December. He's experiencing no pain, and so far he should be good. Tom Murphy, also, he missed all of last year with a broken bone in his foot. He's fully recovered, but his workload will be closely monitored. So Tom Murphy is a guy that a lot of people are drafting also. You have to be careful with him. And I already mentioned about JT Realmuto about wearing a cast. He's actually doing some activities with the cast on. He's been able to catch, been able to hit with the cast. So you know what? I don't think Realmuto will miss any time.
Well, this has been a fantastic episode. I want to thank Ryan for coming on the show. Why don't you tell everybody where we can read your stuff, where we can follow you, and all good things Ryan Bloomfield.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much, guys, for having me on. Again, real big fan. I've pumped the podcast a few times on my social feed and really believe in what you guys are doing. So really appreciate you having me on. You can find me at Twitter at RyanBHQ. And again, search for Bloom Boards on Twitter, and you'll see a bunch of my stuff come up there, and I'll be posting those throughout the rest of draft season and into 2021 once we get to the regular season. You can find my written work at BaseballHQ, and we are also we've got First Pitch Florida online, unfortunately, this year. Hope to get back there in person next March for First Pitch Florida, but we're doing the online version in Zoom, so check that out if you're able and willing at baseballhq.com. I'm really looking forward to that the weekend of March 5th through the 7th. So again, thanks again, guys.
Oh, sure. Ruvain, why don't you plug your stuff?
You can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out weekly, daily injury updates for teams and next guy up as well. And during the season, I also have a weekly injury article for Rotobowler.
Well, my name is Ariel Cohen. You can find my work over at Fangraphs, at CBS Sportsline, at Rotobowler, and you can see my projections on all of those sites. We had a projections update over the weekend, so they're nice and fresh. So take a look at them. And, of course, you can listen to me right here on the Beat the Shift podcast. Follow me on Twitter at ATCNY. Once again, thank you so much to Ryan Bloomfield for being on the show today, and from all of us here at Beat the Shift, have a great one.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.